Before dawn, the desert seems endless. Gentle wind smooths the highest dunes, while fading stars linger above a silent horizon. Travelers who crossed these vast landscapes often believed they were moving through an empty world, untouched by history and almost beyond memory itself. Sand appeared to cover everything except scattered rocks and distant hills, yet the quiet landscape concealed another story. Beneath drifting layers rested forgotten wells, broken walls, abandoned roads, and traces of settlements that once welcomed merchants, pilgrims, and families. The desert had hidden them so completely that many believed they had never existed at all. For centuries, maps often showed these regions as little more than empty spaces separating better-known civilizations. Historians naturally focused on famous kingdoms beside fertile rivers or crowded coastlines where written records survived in greater numbers. The desert seemed to offer little beyond hardship and isolation. Modern archaeology has gradually challenged that assumption. Careful excavations, satellite imagery, and studies of ancient riverbeds reveal networks of communities linked by trade routes stretching across astonishing distances. Weathered inscriptions, fragments of pottery, and forgotten fortresses suggest that thriving societies flourished where only silence now remains, patiently waiting beneath shifting sand for curious minds. The greatest mystery is not simply that kingdoms disappeared. History records many civilizations that rose and eventually declined. What makes these desert kingdoms remarkable is how completely they slipped from popular memory despite leaving real evidence across the landscape. Geological change, slowly redirected rivers, expanding dunes buried roads, and changing trade routes drew travelers elsewhere. Without regular visitors, abandoned settlements gradually became part of the desert itself. Every generation saw fewer visible remains until legends replaced observation, and stories of prosperous lands beyond the horizon faded into uncertain whispers carried by wandering caravans across countless miles. Recent discoveries continue reshaping that forgotten picture. Archaeologists now combine traditional excavation with technologies capable of revealing hidden foundations beneath seemingly untouched ground. Ancient caravan stations emerge beside dried water channels, while traces of fields suggest that landscapes now covered by sand once supported remarkable human activity. Each discovery raises another thoughtful question rather than offering a complete answer. Who governed these settlements? Which languages echoed through their marketplaces? How did families transform difficult surroundings into lasting homes? Every uncovered stone reminds researchers that absence from memory does not mean absence from history, only that the evidence waited patiently beneath the surface. As morning light slowly reaches across the dunes, the desert appears unchanged, peaceful, and almost timeless. Yet every grain of sand now seems to rest upon another forgotten chapter of human experience. The silence is no longer empty, but filled with quiet possibility, inviting patient exploration instead of quick conclusions. Rather than beginning with certainty, this journey begins with careful questions shaped by archaeology, history, and the landscape itself. If the desert concealed remarkable kingdoms for so many centuries, who were the people confident enough to build flourishing lives within one of Earth's most demanding environments? Long before caravans carried precious goods across the desert, small groups of people had already begun listening to the rhythms of this demanding land. They watched brief seasonal rains gather inside shallow valleys, learned where hidden springs reached the surface, and followed animals toward dependable water. What first appeared unforgiving gradually revealed patterns understood through patience rather than force. Families returned to trusted camps year after year until temporary shelters became permanent homes. In time, scattered villages appeared beside precious wells, proving that survival in the desert depended less on luck than careful observation shared across generations, quietly shaping futures. Archaeological excavations offer quiet confirmation of those early choices. Fragments of pottery, polished stone tools, grinding stones, animal bones, and carefully built storage pits reveal communities planning far beyond a single season. Houses were arranged with surprising order, suggesting cooperation between neighboring families rather than isolated survival. Evidence of domesticated livestock shows that people balanced movement with stability, adapting whenever rainfall changed. These discoveries remind historians that successful settlements were created through accumulated knowledge, passed patiently from parents to children until experience became tradition. Across generations, these practical lessons formed resilient communities capable of welcoming strangers and sustaining lasting growth. The desert was never completely isolated. Ancient paths linked distant oases like quiet threads across an immense landscape. Travelers exchanged stories, salt, ornaments, livestock, and practical advice about water and weather. Each successful journey strengthened trust between communities that depended upon one another. Gradually, familiar stopping places became meeting points where friendships and trade grew together. The earliest caravan routes were not built by kings, but by ordinary people, whose repeated journeys connected neighbors across great distances, laying foundations for wider exchange in centuries ahead, without realizing their legacy would reach far beyond the horizon itself, one day soon afterward. As villages prospered, their understanding of the landscape became their greatest resource. They knew which valleys collected rain, where underground water could be reached, and how changing seasons influenced travel. This knowledge could not be copied quickly by outsiders. It was earned through observation, memory, and cooperation. Modern environmental studies support this picture, revealing ancient watercourses and greener periods that helped sustain early settlement. Together with archaeological evidence, they suggest remarkable adaptation instead of improbable fortune. Their confidence encouraged larger settlements that slowly attracted skilled craftspeople, experienced traders, and families seeking opportunity, creating the first foundations of a future kingdom. Looking back, it becomes clear that great kingdoms rarely appear suddenly. They grow from countless ordinary decisions made by people determined to understand the places they call home. Every well protected, every path remembered, and every harvest shared strengthened the communities that followed. Long before rulers raised monuments or ambassadors crossed distant frontiers, these early settlements had already demonstrated remarkable resilience. Their quiet achievements prepared the ground for a kingdom that neighboring civilizations would eventually respect. The next question is equally compelling. What transformed these connected villages into a forgotten power, remembered by its neighbors, yet overlooked by much history? Across generations, the scattered villages gradually became something greater. Familiar trails widened into dependable caravan routes, linking wells, seasonal rivers, and sheltered oases across enormous distances. What had once been isolated communities now welcomed travelers carrying unfamiliar languages, new skills, and valuable goods. Desert knowledge became a form of wealth, allowing local leaders to guide merchants safely through landscapes outsiders struggled to cross. Instead of standing apart from neighboring civilizations, these settlements quietly connected them, transforming the desert from an obstacle into a bridge between distant regions and expanding opportunities for everyone together, through patient cooperation, mutual trust, enduring exchange. Archaeological discoveries reveal that this growing network required careful organization. Excavated storehouses, fortified compounds, workshops, and planned streets suggest communities guided by capable administration rather than chance. Pottery styles became more consistent, metalworking improved, and finely crafted ornaments appeared beside practical tools. These changes indicate increasing specialization, with artisans refining their skills while leaders coordinated resources across multiple settlements. Defensive walls protected valuable supplies, yet the strongest foundation remained cooperation, because prosperity depended upon secure roads, reliable water, and agreements that encouraged strangers to trade instead of compete peacefully across expanding frontiers with neighboring communities, benefiting every traveler involved daily. Geography offered advantages that outsiders often overlooked. The kingdom stood between fertile valleys, distant forests, mineral-rich highlands, and coastal markets, making it a natural meeting place for commerce. Caravans arrived carrying gold, ivory, incense, precious stones, colorful textiles, and carefully crafted objects exchanged for food, protection, guidance, and local products. Along with merchandise came ideas about religion, architecture, farming, and craftsmanship. Every successful journey enriched both visitors and residents, demonstrating that influence could grow through shared opportunity instead of territorial conquest alone. Over time, trusted relationships proved more valuable than constant conflict, strengthening prosperity across generations without endless warfare. The rise of this kingdom was therefore neither sudden nor accidental. It reflected centuries of observation, cooperation, and practical leadership shaped by the desert itself. Local rulers understood that protecting wells and caravan routes often produced greater rewards than seeking distant conquests. Their authority rested upon maintaining stability, resolving disputes, and ensuring merchants could travel with confidence. Archaeological evidence from administrative buildings and standardized weights suggests growing systems of governance that encouraged fair exchange while supporting communities spread across challenging landscapes. These quiet achievements gradually transformed respected settlements into influential centers recognized by neighboring civilizations throughout the ancient world alike. By the time distant travelers spoke of prosperous lands beyond the desert horizon, the kingdom had already become an essential crossroads, linking cultures separated by remarkable distances. Its greatest strength was not overwhelming military power, but the ability to welcome movement, exchange, and cooperation. Wealth flowed because people trusted the routes crossing its territory, and that trust became the kingdom's greatest treasure. Yet success rarely remains unnoticed forever. As prosperity expanded, ambitious neighbors also began looking toward this flourishing desert realm with growing interest. Could wise leadership protect everything patient generations had carefully built through peaceful commerce and mutual respect? As the kingdom prospered, its towns grew into lively cities where movement rarely ceased. Long before sunrise, caravan animals entered through sturdy gates while traders prepared their goods beneath the cool morning air. Market streets gradually filled with voices from distant lands, each language carrying echoes of places separated by mountains, rivers, and deserts. Merchants carefully unpacked ivory, incense, colorful fabrics, finely crafted metalwork, precious stones, and baskets filled with unfamiliar spices. The city became more than a destination. It was a meeting place where journeys ended, new partnerships began, and the wider ancient world quietly gathered within walls shaped by generations of careful planning. Archaeological excavations allow these silent streets to come alive once more. Imported pottery from distant regions rests beside locally made vessels, while foreign coins, beads, seals, and fragments of written inscriptions reveal connections reaching far beyond the desert. Storage buildings suggest careful management of valuable goods arriving throughout the year, and workshops filled with broken tools preserve traces of skilled hands that shaped stone, wood, leather, and metal into objects both beautiful and practical. Every discovery reveals a community that valued organization, craftsmanship, and exchange, demonstrating that prosperity depended upon countless ordinary tasks repeated patiently every single day across the bustling city. Beyond the marketplaces, daily life followed a rhythm familiar across many civilizations. Children watched parents weave cloth, shape pottery, or repair tools before gradually learning those same skills themselves. Bakers prepared bread while potters tended their kilns, and metalworkers patiently transformed glowing ore into useful objects. Farmers arriving from nearby fields exchanged grain, fruit, and livestock for goods difficult to produce locally. Travelers rested beside wells after exhausting desert crossings, sharing stories gathered from distant kingdoms. Temples welcomed quiet moments of reflection, reminding both residents and visitors that commerce and community existed alongside deeply rooted spiritual traditions that gave everyday life meaning. Although rulers guided the kingdom's future, its greatest strength rested upon people whose names have disappeared from history. Every caravan required guides who understood hidden water sources. Every workshop depended upon experienced artisans, and every marketplace relied upon honest negotiation between strangers. Archaeological evidence rarely preserves individual voices, yet household objects, tools, and modest homes quietly reveal lives shaped by dedication rather than fame. These forgotten individuals created the stability that allowed merchants to travel confidently across enormous distances. Their daily efforts sustained an economy whose influence extended well beyond the city's walls and into neighboring civilizations connected through peaceful exchange. Today, only weathered foundations and scattered artifacts remain where lively streets once echoed with conversation. Yet those quiet remains invite us to imagine a city alive with movement instead of silence, where distant cultures met not through conquest, but through cooperation and shared opportunity. The forgotten kingdom flourished because ordinary people welcomed unfamiliar faces, and transformed difficult landscapes into places of remarkable prosperity. As commerce carried its reputation ever farther across the ancient world, neighboring rulers naturally began to take notice. The next question quietly emerges from these thriving streets. How did careful diplomacy preserve peace in such a competitive and interconnected world? Across the vast desert, prosperity depended upon movement. Long caravans of camels departed before sunrise, following routes remembered through generations rather than marked upon maps. Experienced guides recognized distant hills, changing stars, and subtle patterns in the sand that revealed the safest direction. Between journeys, they repaired equipment, gathered supplies, and prepared animals for weeks of travel. What appeared from afar as an empty wilderness was actually crossed by invisible highways connecting distant communities. Every successful expedition strengthened relationships between regions separated by deserts, mountains, fertile valleys, and shimmering coastal waters. Carrying goods also meant carrying trust, knowledge, hope, onward. Ancient trade demanded careful planning long before the first camel stepped forward. Wells had to be maintained, resting places supplied, and reliable schedules followed whenever seasons allowed safe passage. Archaeological discoveries of storage buildings, caravan stations, imported ceramics, glass vessels, metal objects, and written inscriptions reveal an organized network extending far beyond one kingdom. Each artifact quietly confirms that merchants expected regular exchange instead of rare adventure. The desert was challenging, but disciplined preparation transformed uncertain journeys into dependable connections linking many civilizations. Generations shared roots, responsibilities, and practical wisdom, so every arrival strengthened confidence, prosperity, and enduring cooperation together. Beyond valuable merchandise, caravans carried ideas that quietly reshaped every destination. Religious beliefs traveled beside fragrant incense, artistic styles accompanied decorated pottery, and practical innovations spread with experienced craftsmen seeking opportunity. Languages mixed naturally within busy markets, allowing interpreters, merchants, and travelers to exchange knowledge as readily as precious goods. Archaeological evidence suggests that distant influences appeared gradually through everyday contact instead of dramatic conquest. The kingdom prospered because it welcomed conversation as eagerly as commerce, becoming a bridge between cultures that might otherwise never have met. Every successful meeting expanded understanding across generations, enriching neighboring societies through peaceful exchange. Such remarkable journeys depended upon cooperation rarely celebrated in surviving histories. Caravan leaders trusted guides, guides trusted well-keepers, and merchants trusted agreements honored across unfamiliar frontiers. One broken promise could discourage future expeditions, while years of fairness encouraged increasing prosperity. This hidden infrastructure of relationships proved just as important as roads or animals. Modern historians recognize that confidence, reputation, and shared experience formed invisible foundations supporting commerce across immense landscapes, where survival depended upon reliable partnerships every single season. Those enduring partnerships allowed distant kingdoms to exchange resources, technologies, friendships, and mutual respect without constant conflict, strengthening everyone involved. Looking across these ancient routes today, it becomes easier to understand that the desert connected worlds rather than separating them. Every caravan left behind more than footprints, leaving quiet traces of cooperation preserved within artifacts scattered across remarkable distances. The forgotten kingdom stood at the heart of this living network, earning influence through dependable exchange instead of relentless conquest. Yet growing wealth rarely escaped attention forever. As neighboring powers watched prosperity increase, could careful diplomacy continue protecting everything peaceful commerce had patiently created? The answer would shape the kingdom's future in unexpected ways, revealing new challenges beyond the horizon ahead. The kingdom's growing prosperity brought opportunity, but it also demanded wisdom. Beyond the desert stretched neighboring states with ambitions of their own, each seeking secure trade, valuable resources, and reliable allies. Rulers understood that lasting stability could not depend upon military strength alone. Every caravan crossing the frontier represented shared interests between distant communities, and every peaceful season encouraged greater prosperity. Rather than treating every neighboring kingdom as an enemy, careful leaders searched for common advantage. They recognized that cooperation often protected their people more effectively than endless campaigns across difficult landscapes ever could, through patience and measured judgment. Archaeological discoveries and surviving inscriptions offer quiet glimpses into these relationships. Diplomatic gifts of gold, ivory, finely woven textiles, carved stone vessels, and beautifully crafted jewelry traveled between courts as symbols of respect rather than simple displays of wealth. Historical records from neighboring civilizations also describe exchanges of envoys who carried messages, negotiated agreements, and strengthened trust through personal meetings. Marriage alliances sometimes joined influential families across political boundaries, creating bonds that extended beyond commerce alone. These partnerships reflected an understanding that shared prosperity was often more valuable than uncertain victory gained through conflict and costly military expeditions. Diplomacy demanded remarkable patience. Ambassadors crossed deserts carrying carefully chosen gifts alongside proposals that balanced generosity with practical necessity. Trade agreements protected caravan routes, guaranteed access to wells, and established expectations that benefited merchants traveling in both directions. Farmers gained confidence that harvests could reach distant markets, while artisans found new customers beyond familiar settlements. Even when disagreements arose, negotiation frequently offered solutions that preserved relationships built over many years. The success of these quiet conversations rarely appeared in monuments, yet they shaped everyday life as surely as walls, roads, or temples across the kingdom's expanding frontiers. This does not mean the kingdom lived without danger. Archaeological evidence suggests that defensive structures were strengthened during uncertain periods, reminding historians that peaceful intentions did not always prevent conflict. Neighboring rulers sometimes competed for valuable trade routes or access to scarce resources, and alliances could change as political circumstances evolved. Yet the remarkable lesson preserved within surviving evidence is that cooperation remained the preferred path whenever possible. Stability encouraged commerce, and commerce enriched every community connected by the kingdom's far-reaching network. Wise leadership understood that protecting peace often required greater skill than preparing for war alone. Looking back across these forgotten centuries, the kingdom's greatest achievement may have been its ability to build influence through conversation as well as commerce. Its rulers discovered that trust, fairness, and careful negotiation could unite distant peoples just as effectively as military conquest. These quiet successes helped create generations of stability that allowed cities to flourish and caravans to travel with confidence. Yet even the wisest diplomacy could not control every force shaping history. Beyond the decisions of kings and ambassadors, changes in climate, shifting trade routes, and the rise of new powers were already beginning to reshape the world around them. Could any kingdom, however well governed, withstand challenges that no treaty could prevent? There came a time when the forgotten kingdom reached a quiet confidence, shaped by centuries of patience rather than sudden conquest. Its cities expanded beyond their earliest walls, temples welcomed growing communities, and caravan routes carried an almost constant rhythm of arrivals and departures. Visitors approaching across the desert no longer found scattered settlements but a thriving civilization whose prosperity could be seen in carefully planned streets, impressive public buildings, and busy marketplaces. The kingdom had become a destination known to merchants, pilgrims, and ambassadors alike, a place where distant worlds met beneath the same wide desert sky and exchanged far more than valuable goods. Archaeological discoveries reveal traces of this remarkable flourishing. Monumental architecture built from carefully cut stone still rises above the surrounding landscape, while the remains of temples, administrative buildings, workshops, and storehouses suggest a society with both practical organization and artistic ambition. Stone carvings display skilled craftsmanship, delicate jewelry reflects remarkable technical ability, and decorated pottery shows an appreciation for beauty alongside everyday usefulness. Every excavation uncovers another piece of a civilization that invested not only in survival, but also in culture, ceremony, and public life. These achievements speak quietly across the centuries, revealing confidence earned through stability rather than excess. Prosperity reached far beyond the cities themselves. Farmers carefully managed fertile land wherever rivers, seasonal floods, or underground water allowed cultivation to flourish. Archaeological studies suggest that irrigation channels, storage facilities, and well-planned fields supported growing populations despite the surrounding desert. Harvests sustained local communities while supplying merchants preparing for long journeys across distant frontiers. Skilled artisans transformed raw materials into objects admired far beyond the kingdom's borders, and experienced builders continually improved the towns that had become symbols of lasting success. Together, agriculture, craftsmanship, and trade formed a balanced foundation that allowed the kingdom to flourish across generations. Religion also shaped the kingdom's golden age. Temples offered places of worship, reflection, and community gathering, while ceremonies connected daily life with changing seasons and the rhythms of the natural world. Archaeological evidence from sacred sites, inscriptions, and carefully prepared burials suggests that spiritual traditions influenced both rulers and ordinary families. Religious celebrations reinforced shared identity, encouraging cooperation across communities linked by trade and common belief. At the same time, contact with neighboring civilizations introduced new artistic influences and ideas, enriching local traditions without replacing them. The kingdom's confidence rested not upon isolation but upon its ability to welcome exchange while preserving its own distinctive character. Looking across the evidence today, it becomes clear that this was far more than a prosperous trading center. It was a mature civilization whose influence reached beyond the desert through commerce, craftsmanship, diplomacy, agriculture, and enduring cultural traditions. For those living within its cities, the future may have seemed secure, built upon generations of wisdom and careful leadership. Yet history often reminds us that the brightest chapters of a civilization are sometimes written just before unexpected change begins. As wealth continued to grow and distant kingdoms looked toward this flourishing land with increasing interest, one quiet question remained. Could such remarkable prosperity truly endure unchanged beneath the ever-shifting desert horizon? Today, the kingdom speaks most clearly through stone. Weathered temples stand beneath open skies, tombs rest quietly beneath the desert, and scattered inscriptions preserve voices that would otherwise have disappeared forever. Archaeologists patiently piece together these fragments, discovering not only the stories of rulers but also glimpses of ordinary lives hidden within the remains of homes, workshops, and burial places. Every carved symbol, worn pathway, and carefully shaped vessel reminds us that civilizations are built by people whose greatest achievements often leave only the smallest traces. Together, these silent discoveries transform forgotten ruins into communities once filled with conversation, work, celebration, and hope. The monuments reveal the ambitions of kings and queens who guided the kingdom through years of prosperity. Temple walls display scenes of ceremonies, offerings, and royal authority, while inscriptions record names, achievements, and acts of devotion intended to outlive those who commissioned them. Sculptures carved with remarkable skill suggest confidence in both craftsmanship and leadership. Yet archaeology also teaches an important lesson. Monumental buildings alone cannot explain an entire civilization. They represent only a small part of a much larger story that unfolded each day in streets, fields, workshops, and family homes beyond the palace walls. It is often the simplest objects that bring the past closest to the present. Cooking vessels blackened by ancient fires, weaving tools polished by repeated use, children's toys shaped from clay, and worn sandals left inside forgotten buildings all preserve moments untouched by written history. Burial sites reveal jewelry carefully placed beside loved ones, suggesting affection as well as spiritual belief. Grain stores and household pottery hint at careful planning for changing seasons, while modest homes demonstrate that comfort came through cooperation rather than luxury alone. These discoveries remind us that ordinary families experience joy, hardship, celebration, and uncertainty, much as people continue to do today. Religious life also shaped the rhythm of every generation. Temples welcomed seasonal ceremonies, sacred processions, and quiet personal offerings, connecting communities through shared traditions that strengthen social bonds. Archaeological evidence suggests that beliefs evolved over time as merchants introduced ideas from neighboring civilizations. Yet local customs remained deeply rooted within the kingdom's identity. This balance between tradition and exchange reflected a society confident enough to learn from others without losing its own character. Beneath the visible achievements of architecture and trade existed a quieter strength built upon shared values, family relationships, and collective memory passed patiently from one generation to the next. Yet even during these prosperous years, subtle signs of change were beginning to appear. Environmental studies suggest that rainfall patterns gradually shifted in some regions, while archaeological evidence hints that trade became less predictable as neighboring powers expanded and new routes emerged elsewhere. Repairs replaced ambitious new construction in certain settlements, and some communities slowly declined, while others struggled to adapt. None of these changes alone threatened the kingdom, but together, they marked the beginning of a transformation that few living at the time could have fully understood. The civilization still appeared strong, yet history was already turning quietly toward another chapter. How does a kingdom recognize the beginning of its own decline when everyday life still seems filled with promise? The kingdom did not awaken one morning to discover that its prosperity had ended. Instead, change arrived so quietly that few people would have recognized it as the beginning of a different age. The familiar rhythm of caravans continued across the desert, markets still welcomed travelers, and workshops remained busy with their daily tasks. Yet beneath this appearance of stability, small differences slowly accumulated. A journey that once brought many merchants now brought only a few. A trusted trading partner looked elsewhere for opportunity. Wells required greater care, and conversations increasingly turned toward uncertain seasons rather than confident plans for the future. Archaeological discoveries reflect these gradual changes with remarkable clarity. Excavated caravan stations that once stored abundant goods show signs of reduced activity, while some settlements reveal repaired buildings instead of ambitious new construction. Imported pottery becomes less common in certain regions, suggesting that long-distance trade was no longer as dependable as it had once been. Storage rooms that previously held merchandise from distant lands appear to have served more local needs. None of these discoveries points to sudden disaster. Together, however, they reveal a slow weakening of the commercial network that had supported the kingdom across many generations. Several forces likely worked together to reshape the kingdom's fortunes. Historians and archaeologists continue to debate the importance of each factor, but evidence suggests that shifting trade routes redirected merchants toward emerging centers elsewhere. Political alliances changed as neighboring powers grew stronger, encouraging caravans to seek different paths across the region. Environmental studies also indicate that changing rainfall patterns may have affected grazing lands and reliable water sources, making familiar journeys increasingly difficult. Rather than a single cause, the kingdom appears to have faced a combination of gradual pressures, each one manageable alone but far more challenging when experienced together over many decades. For ordinary families, these changes were woven into everyday life instead of appearing as dramatic turning points. Merchants adjusted their routes, craftsmen accepted fewer distant commissions, and farmers adapted to changing seasons with the resilience their ancestors had always shown. Children continued learning family trades, temples remained places of worship, and community celebrations still marked the passing years. Few people could have imagined that historians would one day describe this period as the beginning of decline. Life continued, though often with quieter markets, longer journeys, and opportunities that slowly became less certain than they had once seemed. Looking back across the centuries, the kingdom's story reminds us that civilizations rarely recognize the moment when their greatest achievements begin to fade. Their endings are often written not through sudden catastrophe, but through countless ordinary decisions shaped by changing circumstances. The desert roads did not fall silent all at once. They simply carried fewer footsteps with each passing generation, until the familiar movement that had once connected distant worlds became increasingly difficult to hear. As commerce weakened and influence gradually diminished, another question quietly emerged from the drifting sand. If the kingdom slowly disappeared from the landscape, why did its memory fade almost as completely as its cities? The kingdom did not vanish in a single generation. Long after its busiest markets had grown quieter and fewer caravans crossed the familiar desert roads, people continued living among its aging walls. Temples still welcomed worshippers, farmers tended the remaining fertile land, and families carried forward traditions learned from their ancestors. Yet beyond the kingdom's borders, the world was changing. New powers rose, new capitals attracted merchants and scholars, and fresh trade routes gradually drew attention elsewhere. As the centuries passed, the kingdom slipped from the center of history until it occupied only the distant edges of memory. Written history often survives by chance as much as by achievement. Manuscripts decay, libraries burn, languages evolve, and the records of one civilization are sometimes replaced by those of another. Historians understand that the survival of historical memory depends upon countless fragile circumstances extending far beyond the events themselves. In this case, the kingdom's story gradually became scattered across isolated inscriptions, passing references in foreign accounts, and traditions preserved by local communities. Later generations occasionally encountered weathered ruins in the desert, but few could identify the people who had planned the cities or understand the lives once lived within them. Nature completed what time had quietly begun. Wind carried layer after layer of fine sand across abandoned streets, filling courtyards and covering foundations that had once supported thriving neighborhoods. Roofs collapsed beneath years of neglect, walls slowly eroded beneath relentless sunlight, and forgotten wells disappeared beneath drifting dunes. The desert did not erase the kingdom through sudden violence. Instead, it patiently folded the remains back into the landscape, making abandoned settlements appear like ordinary hills and rocky outcrops. Travelers passed nearby without realizing that entire chapters of human history rested only a short distance beneath their feet. Modern archaeology has revealed that disappearance from memory is not the same as disappearance from history. Beneath the surface, pottery remained where families last used it, inscriptions preserved names that had not been spoken for centuries, and burial sites protected stories of communities long forgotten. Fragments of architecture, household tools, jewelry, and carefully constructed walls endured beneath the sand, waiting for careful excavation rather than dramatic discovery. Every recovered object quietly challenged the old belief that the desert had always been empty. Instead, the evidence revealed a civilization whose achievements had survived, even when its name had almost entirely faded from common knowledge. Perhaps the kingdom's greatest lesson is not about decline, but about memory itself. Human history is often imagined as a continuous story, yet countless chapters have been misplaced, overlooked, or buried beneath changing landscapes. The land remembers long after written records fall silent, preserving traces that patient generations may one day uncover again. What seemed lost was often only hidden, protected by time rather than destroyed by it. For centuries, this forgotten kingdom rested beneath the quiet desert, waiting without urgency for curious minds to return. The next chapter begins with an equally remarkable question: what finally led archaeologists back to the forgotten world beyond the desert horizon? For many centuries, the forgotten kingdom rested quietly beneath the desert, its cities hidden beneath drifting sand, and its name fading from everyday memory. Yet the landscape never surrendered every trace of its past. Travelers occasionally noticed weathered stone walls rising from the dunes, while local communities passed down stories about unusual ruins scattered across the horizon. Broken pottery appeared after strong winds, abandoned wells emerged where the sand briefly shifted, and carved stones hinted that people had once built far more than temporary camps in these seemingly empty lands. The desert remained silent, but it had never become completely empty of evidence. The first attempts to understand these scattered remains were often uncertain. Early explorers recorded ruins that seemed impressive, yet difficult to explain, sometimes comparing them with better-known civilizations simply because few alternatives were available. Without modern dating techniques or extensive archaeological surveys, many discoveries remained isolated pieces of a much larger puzzle. A carved inscription might be documented without knowing where it belonged, while fragments of pottery were collected before anyone realized they formed part of an extensive settlement. Even so, these early observations preserved valuable information that later generations of researchers would return to with fresh questions and better methods. Gradually, archaeology became less about collecting remarkable objects and more about understanding the lives connected to them. Careful excavation replaced hurried digging, allowing researchers to study buildings layer by layer instead of searching only for spectacular discoveries. Broken tools remained where they had been used, discarded pottery revealed patterns of everyday life, and forgotten hearths preserved traces of ancient meals. And archaeologists learned that even the smallest fragment could contribute to a much larger story when examined alongside hundreds of similar discoveries. Every carefully recorded detail strengthened the picture of a civilization that had flourished across the desert long before modern historians recognized its importance. Collaboration also transformed the search for the forgotten kingdom. Local knowledge proved invaluable as communities familiar with the landscape identified ancient wells, seasonal pathways, and ruined settlements overlooked by earlier visitors. Scientific advances gradually improved the ability to determine the age of artifacts, while environmental studies revealed former river channels and greener landscapes that had supported human settlement centuries before. Together, archaeology, geology, and local experience created a richer understanding than any single discipline could have achieved alone. Instead of isolated ruins, researchers began seeing an interconnected network of communities whose history stretched far beyond individual excavation sites. The rediscovery of the kingdom reminds us that history often returns one careful observation at a time. A weathered inscription, a fragment of pottery, or the outline of a forgotten wall may seem insignificant in isolation, yet together they reveal the lives of thousands of people whose stories once appeared lost forever. Archaeology is not a search for buried treasure, but a patient conversation with the past, built from evidence gathered slowly and thoughtfully across generations. As excavations expanded and new discoveries accumulated, long-held assumptions about the desert began to change. But another remarkable development was waiting just beyond the horizon. What new technologies would allow researchers to see what had remained hidden beneath the sand for centuries? For much of history, the desert appeared to conceal more than it revealed. Endless dunes seemed to erase roads, buildings, and entire communities with remarkable patience. Yet modern archaeology has shown that the landscape often preserves history rather than destroying it. Beneath layers of wind-blown sand remain the outlines of forgotten settlements, abandoned fields, and ancient pathways waiting to be recognized. What once looked like an empty wilderness has gradually become a vast historical archive, revealing that the desert kept its memories hidden instead of allowing them to disappear forever. One of the greatest changes has come from the ability to study the landscape from above. Satellite imagery and aerial photography reveal subtle patterns almost impossible to recognize while standing on the ground. Faint lines crossing the desert may mark ancient caravan routes, while unusual shapes beneath the sand sometimes outline buried buildings or defensive walls. Environmental surveys identify dried river channels that once supported thriving communities, explaining why settlements appeared in places that now seem far too dry for permanent life. These discoveries allow archaeologists to ask better questions before the first excavation even begins, saving years of uncertain searching across immense distances. Technology, however, has never replaced the careful work of excavation. Ground-penetrating radar can suggest where structures may lie hidden, but only patient fieldwork can reveal their true purpose. Archaeologists still brush sand away one layer at a time, recording every stone, pottery fragment, and inscription with meticulous care. Ancient texts are compared with physical evidence, while environmental studies help explain how changing climates shaped human decisions across generations. Each scientific method contributes another piece of the puzzle, but it is their combination that creates the clearest understanding of the forgotten kingdom and the people who once called it home. Even with these remarkable advances, certainty remains rare. New discoveries often challenge ideas that once seemed firmly established, encouraging historians to revise earlier interpretations instead of defending outdated conclusions. A settlement believed to be isolated may later prove connected to a much larger network, while fresh dating techniques occasionally reveal that buildings are older or younger than first imagined. Archaeology thrives because questions continue alongside answers. Every excavation expands knowledge while reminding researchers that the past is more complex than any single discovery can fully explain. The kingdom continues to reveal itself gradually, rewarding patience rather than quick certainty. Looking across the desert today, it is difficult to see only sand. Hidden beneath the quiet surface lie roads once filled with travelers, fields that supported growing families, and cities where cultures met through commerce instead of conquest. Modern science has not uncovered every secret, but it has allowed humanity to listen more carefully to landscapes long believed silent. The forgotten kingdom has returned not through legend but through evidence, patiently gathered across decades of research. Rediscovery has shown where this remarkable civilization once stood. The next question reaches even further across time. What can the people who lived beyond the desert horizon still teach us about the ancient world and ourselves? Long before the markets filled with merchants and the temples welcomed quiet ceremonies, the day began inside ordinary homes. As the first light spread across the desert horizon, families stirred to familiar routines, shaped by generations of experience. Fires were lit for morning meals, water was drawn from nearby wells, and simple tools were gathered before work began. Children watched parents prepare bread, mend baskets, or care for livestock, learning not through formal lessons but through careful observation and daily practice. The kingdom's prosperity rested upon these quiet beginnings, repeated countless times in homes whose owners left few written records, but whose lives still echo through archaeology. Excavations of ancient houses offer remarkable glimpses into these forgotten routines. Grinding stones worn smooth by years of use, cooking vessels blackened by countless fires, and storage jars carefully placed against interior walls reveal households that planned thoughtfully for changing seasons. Archaeologists have uncovered weaving tools, fishing equipment, spindle whorls, and simple furniture, each object suggesting work shared among family members. Food remains, including grains, fruits, and animal bones, provide evidence of diets adapted to local conditions while also reflecting connections with distant trade networks. These modest discoveries quietly transform abandoned buildings into homes once filled with conversation, laughter, responsibility, and hope. Beyond the household, workshops formed another important part of daily life. Skilled artisans shaped clay into pottery, worked metal into useful tools and elegant ornaments, and carved stone with remarkable precision. Many crafts were learned within families, passing practical knowledge from one generation to the next. Farmers tended fields wherever fertile soil and reliable water allowed crops to flourish, understanding the changing rhythms of weather better than any written calendar. Merchants inspected goods before long journeys, while caravan guides prepared animals for weeks of travel across demanding landscapes. Every occupation depended upon another, creating a community strengthened by cooperation instead of individual achievement alone. Although history often remembers rulers, archaeology reminds us that civilizations endure because ordinary people continue their work each day. A repaired farming tool speaks of persistence, a child's toy suggests affection within the family, and a carefully woven basket reflects hours of patient craftsmanship. These quiet objects preserve lives that official inscriptions rarely recorded. They reveal parents hoping for successful harvests, young apprentices eager to master valuable skills, and neighbors relying upon one another during difficult seasons. Across the kingdom, thousands of unnamed individuals shaped its prosperity through steady effort rather than extraordinary fame, leaving behind a legacy measured in everyday resilience instead of celebrated victories. Seen through these ordinary moments, the forgotten kingdom becomes surprisingly familiar. The distance of 2,000 years begins to feel smaller when viewed through shared experiences of family, work, learning, and community. Archaeology allows us to recognize these ancient people not as distant strangers, but as individuals whose daily hopes closely resembled our own. Their homes remind us that history is ultimately the story of countless ordinary lives woven together across generations. Yet, beyond every household stood another place where communities gathered to seek guidance, gratitude, and meaning. Homes reveal how people lived, but temples ask an even deeper question. What beliefs shaped the hearts of those who called this desert kingdom home? As evening settled across the desert, daily work gradually gave way to quieter moments of reflection. The fading light reminded each generation that life followed rhythms far older than any kingdom. Temples stood above surrounding streets, their walls catching the final glow of the setting sun before darkness spread across the horizon. Families gathered for ceremonies, travelers offered thanks for safe journeys, and priests tended sacred places that connected the community with forces believed to guide both the natural world and human destiny. While many details of these beliefs have faded with time, archaeology preserves enough evidence to reveal a society that found meaning in the changing sky as much as in the earth beneath its feet. Excavated temples, shrines, ceremonial vessels, carved statues, and carefully arranged burial sites show that religion shaped nearly every stage of life. Offerings placed beside the dead suggest a belief that existence continued beyond earthly life, although historians remain cautious about describing exactly what people expected after death. Some inscriptions record acts of devotion, while sacred architecture appears deliberately aligned with significant features of the landscape or the movements of the heavens. Archaeological evidence confirms these practices, yet the deeper meanings behind them often remain open to scholarly interpretation. The silence left by history reminds us that some questions deserve thoughtful humility rather than confident certainty. Trade brought more than valuable goods into the kingdom. Across generations, merchants and travelers introduced new religious symbols, artistic traditions, and ceremonial customs from neighboring civilizations. Archaeological discoveries reveal similarities between local objects and those found far beyond the desert, suggesting a gradual exchange of ideas alongside commerce. Yet local traditions did not simply disappear beneath outside influence. Instead, they adapted carefully, blending familiar beliefs with new perspectives, while preserving a distinctive cultural identity. This quiet process reflects a civilization confident enough to learn from distant neighbors, without forgetting the customs that had long connected communities to their own landscape. The heavens also appear to have held special importance. Like many ancient societies, the kingdom depended upon careful observation of seasonal change, making the movements of the sun, moon, and stars valuable guides for travel, farming, and ceremonial life. Some scholars have suggested that the orientation of certain structures reflects astronomical knowledge, although evidence remains incomplete and interpretations continue to be debated. What is beyond doubt is that people lived beneath remarkably clear desert skies, where the changing constellations offered both practical guidance and opportunities for spiritual reflection. Looking upward each evening, they likely experienced the same sense of wonder that still accompanies a sky filled with countless stars. Across thousands of years, these sacred places continue inviting quiet contemplation rather than easy answers. Their weathered stones remind us that every civilization has searched for meaning, comfort, and hope beneath the same heavens. Archaeology can recover temples, burial customs, and ceremonial objects, but the deepest thoughts carried within ancient prayers often remain beyond recovery. Perhaps that mystery is itself part of their enduring legacy. The Forgotten Kingdom has revealed remarkable stories through its homes, cities, and sacred landscapes. Yet many questions remain patiently buried beneath the desert. Could future discoveries one day transform our understanding of this remarkable civilization once again, revealing chapters of history that still lie hidden beneath the shifting sands? After decades of excavation and careful study, the Forgotten Kingdom has become far better understood than it once was. Ancient roads have been traced, settlements uncovered, and thousands of artifacts patiently examined. Yet the deeper archaeologists explore, the more they discover that every answer often reveals another question waiting beneath the sand. The landscape continues to protect parts of its story with remarkable determination. Entire districts may still lie buried beyond the edges of known excavations, while inscriptions remain fragmented and countless sites have never been investigated. Far from reaching the end of the journey, researchers increasingly recognize that they have only begun to understand the full history of this remarkable civilization. One of the greatest uncertainties concerns the kingdom's political organization. Some scholars believe a strong central authority governed distant settlements through regional administrators, supported by evidence from monumental architecture and standardized craftsmanship. Others suggest a looser network of cooperating communities connected by trade and shared traditions rather than strict political control. Archaeological evidence can support aspects of both interpretations, depending upon the region and time period being studied. Because written records remain incomplete, historians continue comparing inscriptions, settlement patterns, and material culture in the hope that future discoveries will clarify how power was truly organized across the desert landscape. The kingdom's population also remains difficult to measure with confidence. Excavated cities reveal impressive planning and substantial public buildings, suggesting prosperous communities capable of supporting large numbers of people. At the same time, many settlements remain only partially explored, while others almost certainly remain hidden beneath drifting sand. Environmental studies help estimate how much land could have supported agriculture and livestock, but these calculations cannot provide exact numbers. Rather than presenting certainty where evidence remains limited, archaeologists acknowledge a range of possibilities, allowing the available discoveries to guide conclusions instead of forcing the past into convenient explanations. Questions surrounding the kingdom's decline remain equally complex. Earlier generations of researchers often searched for a single dramatic cause, whether invasion, prolonged drought, or economic collapse. Today, many historians favor a more gradual interpretation, supported by archaeological evidence. Changing trade routes, environmental pressures, shifting political alliances, and regional competition appear to have influenced one another across many generations. Even so, the balance between these factors continues to be debated. Each newly excavated settlement or refined scientific analysis has the potential to reshape earlier understanding, reminding researchers that historical knowledge grows through careful revision rather than permanent certainty. Perhaps this willingness to question old assumptions is archaeology's greatest strength. The Forgotten Kingdom is not becoming less fascinating because mysteries remain unresolved. Instead, it becomes more alive with every careful excavation, thoughtful debate, and unexpected discovery. History is not a finished book waiting on a shelf, but an unfinished conversation between the present and the past, guided by evidence patiently emerging from beneath the earth. The desert has already revealed far more than anyone once imagined, yet it still guards countless secrets beneath its quiet surface. If one forgotten kingdom can preserve so many unanswered questions, how many others might still be waiting beneath deserts, forests, mountains, and forgotten landscapes across the world? The Forgotten Kingdom beyond the desert horizon is remarkable, yet it is not alone. Across the world, archaeologists continue uncovering traces of civilizations that flourished, declined, and gradually disappeared from common memory. Some lie beneath forests that slowly reclaimed abandoned cities. Others rest beneath fertile farmland, river sediments, or layers of volcanic ash. In every case, familiar landscapes conceal histories that once shaped entire regions before time quietly carried their names beyond ordinary remembrance. Looking beyond a single kingdom reveals a broader truth. Human history is filled with places that seemed lost, not because they vanished completely, but because later generations no longer recognized what remained before their eyes. Although each civilization followed its own path, striking similarities often emerge. Changing climates altered rivers and growing seasons, encouraging communities to adapt or move elsewhere. Trade routes shifted as new powers rose, leaving once prosperous cities outside the busiest networks of exchange. Languages evolved, written records disappeared, and succeeding societies built new settlements with little knowledge of those that had come before. Archaeology reveals these recurring patterns through careful comparison rather than dramatic coincidence. The Forgotten Kingdom becomes part of a much larger story in which resilience and change shaped civilizations across continents over thousands of years. These discoveries also remind us that history is rarely complete. Many rediscovered kingdoms were once dismissed as legends because physical evidence remained hidden beneath the landscape. Careful excavation has since revealed streets, temples, workshops, homes, and monuments that transformed uncertain stories into well-supported historical realities. Yet even today, many ancient societies remain only partially understood. Some are known from a handful of inscriptions, while others survive through scattered artifacts waiting to be connected by future research. Every excavation has the potential to reshape accepted ideas, reminding historians that the past continually expands as new evidence comes to light. Perhaps the greatest lesson is not that civilizations disappear, but that memory can be restored. Each recovered object, whether a simple clay vessel or a monumental inscription, reconnects the present with lives once thought unreachable. Archaeology allows forgotten communities to contribute once again to humanity's shared story, showing how people adapted to changing environments, developed remarkable technologies, exchanged ideas across great distances, and built cultures of lasting significance. The rediscovery of one kingdom therefore enriches far more than regional history. It deepens our understanding of the countless ways human societies have responded to challenge, opportunity, and the passage of time. As this journey gradually draws toward its conclusion, the Forgotten Kingdom no longer stands in isolation. It has become one voice among many, reminding us that the world beneath our feet still holds histories waiting to be understood. Every carefully uncovered foundation and every patiently translated inscription expands the story of humanity itself. The desert has taught us that silence does not always mean absence, and forgotten places often remain quietly present beneath familiar landscapes. One final question now rises, as gently as the morning sun above the horizon. If remembering these forgotten kingdoms changes how we understand the past, why does preserving their stories matter so deeply for the future? When the kingdom's busiest cities gradually grew quiet, its story did not truly come to an end. The walls weathered, the caravan roads welcomed fewer travelers, and many settlements slowly disappeared beneath drifting sand. Yet the ideas, skills, and relationships, shaped across centuries, continued their journey long after the kingdom itself had faded from memory. History rarely moves in clear beginnings and endings. More often, each civilization quietly passes part of itself to those that follow, leaving behind influences too subtle to notice at first, but too important to disappear completely. The Forgotten Kingdom became one more thread woven into the larger fabric of the ancient world. Trade was among its most enduring gifts. Even as familiar routes changed, the knowledge developed by generations of caravan leaders continued guiding movement across the desert. Wells remained valuable landmarks, trusted pathways influenced later travelers, and commercial partnerships established during the kingdom's golden age often survived political change. Archaeological discoveries reveal imported goods appearing far beyond the kingdom's borders, suggesting that its trading networks helped shape regional patterns of exchange for centuries. Commerce carried more than merchandise. It carried practical experience, mutual trust, and an understanding that cooperation across difficult landscapes could create lasting prosperity for many different communities. Its influence can also be seen through craftsmanship and everyday technology. Pottery styles, decorative patterns, metalworking techniques, and methods of construction spread gradually through contact with neighboring peoples. Archaeologists occasionally discover familiar artistic traditions appearing in later settlements, not as exact copies, but as ideas adapted to new places and cultures. Agricultural knowledge followed a similar path. Experience managing scarce water, cultivating fertile ground, and organizing seasonal labor offered practical lessons for communities facing comparable environments. These quiet inheritances rarely carried the kingdom's name, yet they continued shaping daily life long after its cities had fallen silent. Cultural exchange left equally lasting traces. Languages borrowed words from one another. Religious traditions absorbed familiar symbols, and artistic ideas traveled alongside merchants crossing distant frontiers. Archaeology demonstrates that civilizations are rarely isolated creations. They develop through generations of conversation with neighboring societies, each contributing something valuable while receiving new influences in return. The Forgotten Kingdom participated fully in this ongoing exchange, becoming both a teacher and a student within the wider ancient world. Although many individual voices have been lost, the evidence preserved in artifacts, architecture, and settlement patterns reveals a legacy measured through connection rather than conquest. Perhaps this is the gentlest lesson history offers. A civilization does not disappear simply because its name is forgotten or its monuments fall into ruin. Its influence often survives in quieter forms, carried through knowledge, tradition, craftsmanship, and the countless exchanges that continue shaping later generations. The kingdom beyond the desert horizon reminds us that recognition and importance are not always the same. Much of humanity's greatest inheritance comes from people whose names have faded, but whose ideas continue living within the world around us. If traces of this forgotten kingdom still remain in unexpected places, perhaps its greatest legacy is not carved into stone at all, but found in the questions it continues inspiring centuries after its quiet passing. The search for forgotten kingdoms has never been driven only by curiosity about the past. It also reflects a timeless desire to understand how human societies rise, adapt, and respond to changing worlds. Every ancient settlement uncovered beneath the desert reminds us that the people who lived there faced questions surprisingly familiar today. They searched for reliable water, built communities through cooperation, adapted to shifting climates, welcomed new ideas, and overcame unexpected challenges. Their experiences belong not only to one region or one civilization, but to the larger human story shared across continents and generations. Looking into their past quietly encourages us to reflect upon our own place within the long journey of history. Modern archaeology has become a collaboration extending far beyond the excavation trench. Archaeologists work alongside historians, geologists, environmental scientists, linguists, conservators, and local communities, each contributing knowledge that helps reveal a clearer picture of the ancient world. Satellite imagery may identify a forgotten settlement, while careful excavation uncovers its buildings. Scientific analysis determines the age of artifacts, and ancient inscriptions provide names or events that connect isolated discoveries into a broader narrative. Local traditions often preserve valuable knowledge of landscapes overlooked by earlier researchers. Together, these different perspectives transform scattered fragments into meaningful history without allowing any single source of evidence to stand alone. Each excavation also reminds us that archaeology is an unfinished conversation rather than a completed achievement. A newly uncovered wall may answer one long-standing question while raising several more. Improved dating techniques continue refining earlier conclusions, and future discoveries may challenge interpretations that seem convincing today. Rather than weakening historical understanding, this willingness to revise ideas strengthens it. The past is approached with patience, humility, and careful attention to evidence, allowing every generation to build upon the work of those who came before. In this way, the search itself becomes as important as the discoveries, reflecting humanity's enduring commitment to learning rather than certainty. Preserving archaeological sites is therefore about much more than protecting old stones. Temples, homes, workshops, inscriptions, and burial grounds represent shared human memory preserved within the landscape. Once destroyed through neglect, conflict, or uncontrolled development, these silent witnesses cannot easily be replaced. Every carefully protected site offers future generations an opportunity to ask new questions using methods not yet imagined. The Forgotten Kingdom reminds us that today's ruins were once thriving communities, and tomorrow's discoveries may depend upon the choices made by people living in the present. Caring for the past is also an investment in the knowledge still waiting to emerge. Perhaps that is why the search continues with such quiet determination. Beneath today's deserts, forests, mountains, and fields, countless stories remain hidden beneath layers of earth and time, waiting patiently for thoughtful discovery. Each recovered fragment expands humanity's understanding not only of ancient civilizations, but also of ourselves. The Forgotten Kingdom beyond the desert horizon has shown that history is never truly lost, while evidence survives beneath the land. As evening slowly returns across the dunes, and the desert settles once more into peaceful silence, the journey gently circles back to where it first began. Under the same endless sky, one final reflection still awaits beyond the familiar horizon. Night settles gently across the desert once again. Moonlight stretches across rolling dunes, tracing the outlines of ancient caravan paths that have long since fallen silent. Forgotten wells rest beneath drifting sand, while weathered stones cast quiet shadows beneath a sky filled with countless stars. At first glance, the landscape appears unchanged, as though time itself has paused. Yet after following the story of this forgotten kingdom, the desert no longer seems empty. Every dune, every rocky ridge, and every abandoned foundation now suggests a place where people once lived, traded, celebrated, and dreamed beneath the very same heavens. When this journey first began, the greatest mystery seemed to be the disappearance of a kingdom beyond the desert horizon. Gradually, archaeology revealed a different truth. The kingdom had not been erased as completely as generations once believed. Instead, the desert became an unexpected guardian of its memory. Layers of sand protected buildings from later disturbance, buried fragile artifacts beyond the reach of weather, and preserved traces of roads, fields, and settlements that might otherwise have disappeared forever. Rather than destroying history, the landscape quietly sheltered it until patient research allowed forgotten voices to be heard once more. Excavations, environmental studies, satellite imagery, and careful historical analysis have transformed scattered fragments into a remarkable story. Ancient wells revealed where families gathered. Caravan stations marked routes once crossed by merchants from distant lands. And humble household objects restored the daily lives of people whose names rarely appeared in written records. Temples spoke of shared beliefs, workshops preserved remarkable craftsmanship, and forgotten inscriptions hinted at rulers who guided their communities through centuries of prosperity and change. Together, these discoveries revealed a civilization far richer, more connected, and more resilient than earlier generations had imagined possible. Perhaps the greatest lesson is that landscapes possess their own quiet memory. Human recollection fades as languages change, manuscripts disappear, and cities fall into ruin. Yet the earth often continues preserving what people forget. Stone foundations remain beneath drifting sand, pollen survives within ancient soil, and broken pottery rests where it was last used centuries ago. Archaeology teaches us to read these silent records with patience and humility, understanding that history survives in many forms beyond written words. The desert never told its story aloud, but neither did it allow that story to vanish completely. Looking across the moonlit horizon now, the forgotten kingdom no longer feels distant. Its people have returned through the evidence they left behind, reminding us that even the quietest places can hold extraordinary histories. The desert has shown that silence is not the absence of memory, but an invitation to listen more carefully. What once appeared to be an empty wilderness has become a landscape filled with human experience, resilience, and hope. Yet this remarkable kingdom is only one chapter in a much larger story. Beyond every horizon, beneath countless other landscapes, the forgotten past of humanity still waits with equal patience to be understood. The stars shine quietly above the desert tonight, just as they did thousands of years ago, when this forgotten kingdom was alive with voices, footsteps, and the steady rhythm of everyday life. Moonlight drifts gently across silent ruins, ancient roads, and weathered stones that have witnessed generations beyond counting. A cool breeze moves softly over the dunes, carrying grains of sand that settle once more across foundations, patiently resting beneath the earth. The landscape appears peaceful, almost timeless, yet we now know that beneath its calm surface lies a remarkable story of people who built homes, raised families, welcomed travelers, exchanged ideas, and shaped a civilization that nearly vanished from human memory before archaeology invited it back into the light. Throughout this journey, we have walked beside merchants crossing distant deserts, artisans shaping objects with patient hands, children learning from their parents, rulers guiding prosperous communities, and priests watching the changing heavens above the sands. We have seen cities rise through cooperation, flourish through trade, and gradually adapt to a changing world before quiet abandonment settled across streets once filled with life. Piece by piece, careful excavation transformed scattered ruins into living history. Every discovery reminded us that the past is not composed only of famous names or monumental achievements, but also of countless ordinary lives whose quiet efforts sustained an entire civilization. The forgotten kingdom beyond the desert horizon now stands as more than a single place in history. It has become a symbol of humanity's remarkable ability to build, adapt, create, and remember. Across every continent, civilizations have emerged beneath different skies, speaking different languages, and following different traditions. Yet all have shared the same hopes for security, prosperity, family, and a meaningful future. Some remain celebrated through famous monuments, while others still sleep beneath forests, mountains, river valleys, or drifting deserts, patiently waiting for the careful work of future generations. Together, they remind us that the human story has always been far richer than any one chapter can contain. Perhaps every civilization once believed its world would endure forever. Temples were built to outlast generations, roads were laid for travelers yet unborn, and cities grew with confidence that tomorrow would resemble yesterday. Yet history gently teaches a different lesson. Kingdoms change, landscapes transform, and memory fades. What remains is not permanence, but continuity. Ideas travel beyond borders, knowledge passes quietly from one generation to another, and curiosity continues carrying humanity forward. Archaeology does more than uncover buried stones. It reconnects us with people whose lives still shape our understanding of the world, even after their names have long been forgotten. As the night deepens and the desert grows still once more, the horizon stretches endlessly beneath a sky filled with ancient stars. Somewhere beyond that distant line, another forgotten settlement may rest beneath quiet earth. Another abandoned road may lie hidden beneath drifting sand. Another story may be waiting for patient hands and curious minds to bring it gently back into the light. The journey ends here, but history does not. Beyond every horizon, beneath every landscape, And within every unanswered question, another forgotten world still waits, silent, enduring, and ready to remind us that humanity's greatest discoveries may always lie just beyond the next horizon.